Okay, Chair, confirm the live stream started. Over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Schools Forum meeting from the 15th of December 2020. We will, hopefully you've all had an opportunity to access the papers through the NCC website, and we will go straight, Secretary, to the apologies.
Yes, thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Mike Kendall, Northgates Arts College, Ian Massey, Spon School, Ron Whitaker, Nen Education Trust, and also Wendy Brackenbury, who is the shadow portfolio holder for Children's Services in the Northamptonshire Shadow Authority.
Okay, thank you. And I believe we have John Lake, who I don't see yet, who may well be slightly late in joining us.
Correct, thank you, Chair.
Okay, right. Okay, any forum membership changes since the previous meeting?
There is one that I need to advise members of, if you'll just bear with me. It relates to our Northampton College representative. Jenny Thorpe is now going to be on forum instead of Pat Brennan Barrett.
And I see Jenny there. Welcome, Jenny. Okay, so just moving on from that, just looking at the a little update on the North and West shadow forums. Would you like to go through that, or would you like me to?
I'm happy to, Chair, if you would like me to.
Yeah.
So at the last meeting, members did receive a report about the establishment of the new North and West Shadow Forums, which explained what they would be doing in their role. And of course, many of the existing members of the Northamptonshire Schools Forum are also members of the two Shadow Forums, but there are some new members who were able to join and participate in the meeting. As we move towards vesting day, the intention is to expand the role of the Shadow Forums in line with preparations for unitary government. So unlike in October, when we had one meeting with both Sovereign and Shadow members present, this time we will have, we've got Shadow members present at the Sovereign meeting, but we will follow this meeting with two, dare I say, short Shadow Forum meetings at which each Shadow Forum will appoint a chair and vice chair, agree their terms of reference, and ratify the votes taken by the Northamptonshire Schools Forum at this meeting.
Okay, any comments, colleagues? There are quite a lot of you I can't see, so it is difficult to know if anybody does want to say anything. Would be helpful if you are okay with that we were able to see your videos. Thank you. Thank you very much. Any comments? Any can always use the little buttons that the reactions buttons. If anyone has anything to say anything, or just wave, which obviously is much easier if you've got your video on. Okay, so voting arrangements for today, Secretary.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Not dissimilar to last time. What we've put in place in line with the arrangements I just outlined is that the members of the Shadow Forums have been invited to join this meeting, and obviously the Shadow Forum meetings will follow immediately afterwards. So in terms of voting, we're going to go through the reports as normal, and the forum will be asked to cast votes, but then each of the Shadow Forums that will take place upon the rise of this meeting will vote separately. So rather than go through the presentations in detail again, we've just prepared a summary presentation with the votes for both North and West on it to go through at that juncture. Obviously, any members of the Shadow Forums who are not members of the Sovereign Forum can, of course, speak and ask questions throughout and don't need to wait until the Shadow Forum meetings.
Okay, thank you. Okay, as long as that's clear then with everybody, we'll move on to the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of October and then look at any points arising, officer feedback. So everyone should have a copy of the minutes. If I can just check we'll just look through for factual accuracy.
Yeah,
And
Chair, Chair,
yeah.
if I may, apologies for interrupting, but as we're on the subject of factual accuracy, it's been pointed out to me that there are a number of errors in terms of members of Forum having incorrect academy trusts or schools attributed to them. So rather than go through them in individually, I'd undertake that the Secretariat will correct those in the version of the minutes that's published.
Okay, so we will not worry at this point if you've already indicated to Paul any errors on page 1 and the top of page 2. So from then on, just in terms of the main content of the meeting, if we can just check through. So I'm looking now at points 1 and 2, page 2, moving on to page 3. Moving to page 4. Page 5. 6. 7. 8. And 9. Okay, then I would therefore propose those that those are a true and accurate record of the meeting on the 20th of October. I have someone to second that, please. Thank you very much, Kevin. Okay, well, those minutes are accepted then as true and accurate record. Thank you very much, Secretary. Okay, so just in terms of officer feedback. So we have some.
Would you like me to put that up on the screen?
Does everybody need to see that screen, or have they got that in front of them? It's up to you, Beth. Just looking at there, there was an action for Sharon, which is now on the agenda. A number of other items which were no action, and then there was an action for Jess, which is on the 19th of January, and one for yourself, Beth, which will come up at this meeting as well. So I think in terms of that, just the 3 things there, 2 which will come up at this meeting and 1 which will come up at the 19th of January meeting. Okay. Right. So any other matters arising from the minutes that anyone has a comment, or to keep my eye on the chat, which is if anybody feels that they don't want to say something but they want to put something into the chat, that would be fine. Okay, so if there's no other matters arising from those minutes, then if we can then move on to Sharon. Have we got Sharon? Is she on my page 2? I'm just seeing if we have, do we have Sharon, Secretary?
I can't
If I could
see
interrupt, Chair.
Yeah.
I've been asked to give a quick update on what's happening with the TUPE transfer in schools. I don't know whether that was Sharon's item, but I was asked to come on and support her on that item. So that may be the one you're referring to.
Okay, that may be something. She was going to give us an update on the local government review and children's trust update.
Oh, that's not me. No.
No, apologies, Chair. Sharon is due to do the update. However, we had also received some slides under this item on TUPE, which is why Nicole is here. So perhaps if we could go through those slides, and I think Kathy Hadley, Director of Children's Services, just indicating she wants to speak as well.
Right, so if Nicole could start us off then by.
Right, sorry, thank you, Chair. I was just going to update Kathy Hadley, Director of Children's Services, just to update that Sharon is on her way. I've just texted her, she's just in another meeting, so she will be here as soon as she can. So that's all I was going to say, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. So probably if Nicole wants to just run through, do you have the slides, Beth, to share?
Okay. So this is regarding consultation with all the staff in schools where NCC is their employer. And it's obviously regarding the transfer of NCC to the Western Northamptonshire Council under the TUPE regulations. Could you move? No, thank you. So what does this mean for staff? Well, in terms of the TUPE regs, it does apply in this instance, although for schools the impact is minimal. However, it is anticipated that their employment will transfer to either the North or the West Northamptonshire Council on the 1st of April 2021. Under the TUPE regulations, they will transfer on their current terms and conditions. And they will take their current pension and continuous service with them to their new council. So there are currently 96 schools in Northamptonshire where NCC are the employer, and we have anticipated that 63 will move to the west and that the other 33 will move to the north. We sent out briefing packs to all the schools a couple of weeks ago, and have been doing Zoom briefings with them ever since. Thank you, Beth. We obviously, bearing in mind that schools are particularly busy at this time with the run up to Christmas and with COVID issues. Yes, maintained nursery schools are included in these numbers. Head teachers are responsible for cascading the information to all of their school-based staff on the consultation process within the timeframes. So head teachers were sent a full briefing pack, all the documents that they needed in the process, including in-scope letters and a checklist to help them inform their staff of the process that they needed to go through. We've conducted 4 briefings so far. We've got another one to do on Thursday. And we deliver the briefing to them, and obviously there's a Q&A session at the end. Consultation with their staff will run until the 15th of March 2021, and during that time staff can submit questions and give any feedback through their head teacher, and the head teacher has been given all the contact details, email addresses, website links, etc., on where to submit those queries. Thank you, Beth. If individuals do want to have one-to-one meetings, the head teacher will have to respect that request and arrange a one-to-one. But it's unlikely that individuals will, because in fact all that is changing is the name of their employer. But even so, under the regs, they are entitled to that. So they're given a one-to-one on request. And the frequently asked questions for generic frequently asked questions are being updated on a weekly basis on a website link, and they're regularly updated. Head teachers have also been requested to confirm with HR that they've completed the process, so that we have an audit trail and we can check that everyone has been consulted with who should be. Thank you, Beth. This is a consultation timeline. The trade unions were informed on the 4th of November, and then week commencing 30th November through to January, the initial group information and consultation meetings are taking place. They've had measure letters already, although those measures aren't affecting schools directly. There may be any additional measures that are sent out to them in the meantime. But again, the impact on school employees is minimal. They can request individual consultation meetings, as I've already said, but they're not automatic, they're held on request. The 15th of March is the deadline for any questions, comments and feedback, and consultation will close for the schools on the 21st of March 2021, and they will transfer to either the West or the North on the 1st of April 2021. They have lots of support available. Trade unions were on the calls, most of the calls, so all the teacher and school trade unions have been informed, and they've been very active with the schools. They have the HR advisory service for all the Northamptonshire schools for any queries and requests. If the schools buy into the HR service, they will have free access to an employee assistance counselling service, but also schools who may not buy our service have a route that employees can take if they need support. Obviously, they have their trade union reps as well. And as I said, the FAQs, generic FAQs and new FAQs are being added to constantly throughout the consultation period.
I feel like I've been glued in here this morning.
That's it.
Can I ask you to do me a fork and what have you? Yes.
Okay.
Please, would you do me a favour?
Sure. Yeah.
Right, so I've just had
Okay, I think we're getting some feedback
on mute on.
from somebody. Thank you very much. Are there any questions other than the question that Angela has asked there about the maintained nursery schools? Any questions for Nicole, particularly from our maintained school colleagues on the forum about the consultation process? Angela, could you unmute, please?
I'm very used to
Thank
using
you.
Teams and rather not so slick at Zoom. And it isn't a comment on the presentation, just that I attended one of the consultation events last week, and the trade union chap was very, very helpful and made the recommendation that we should all be checking our pensions and the contributions made from NCC and trying to do that prior to any move over. Not that you can't do it after a move over, but actually to try and do that prior. And I don't know if that same rep was at other consultations or not, but I thought it was a very helpful suggestion to be made. I found the session really informative, so thank you.
I would say the pensions question is a really important one, and it's a worthwhile message to getting out to all schools is to be doing that checking and just seeing, you know, is it better to be done earlier than later?
No, absolutely. And that's what we're repeating in all of the sessions, that they need to check their records are correct before we transfer. So yes, that's what people are indeed doing.
Okay. Thank you very much, Nicole. Sharon, I think you're with us now. Welcome. Sharon, could you unmute, please?
Sorry, such a rookie error, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, slightly delayed on a previous Zoom call, but yes, I'm with you now.
Okay, lovely. Can you pick up from now then, just with that item, local government review, Children's Trust update?
Yeah, so if I just give an update on the education teams in children's services, and then perhaps if I pass to Kathy for a Children's Trust update, so she can give a overview. So very much like Nicole's outlined, we're going through a similar process for our local authority employees. We are moving through the new structure, and that will be shared very shortly. There will be some teams, as you know, that are already working in the localities delivering services, so they will be locality based services. There will also be some services that will work across both the North and the West. So we've agreed that model now, and we'll be in the process of communicating that with staff shortly, and then moving through the TUPE process with our staff as outlined in the same way that Nicole's identified. And then obviously, and we will do that, we will then share that structure with schools upon their return. And again, as I've said before, we've been very mindful of just all the activity around COVID and additional strain. So just being clear about when we communicating with certainty about the structure. So we've finished most of the diagnostic work now and have looked at what that means for staff, very confident around stability for both our staff and also our service delivery. And we'll be implementing the changes we need to make to get to a safe landing for vesting day. But more detail will come out to schools around the services and the structures in January. And we'll do that as light touch as we can so that heads don't have to wade through lots of information. We'll make it as easily to read as possible. Kathy, shall I hand over to you for the Children's Trust?
Yes, yep, thank you, Chair. Thank you. It's nice to be here. Very first meeting Schools Forum for me. So Kathy Hadley, Director of Children's Services. People be hopefully aware that the Director of Children's Services statutory role remains in the Council, even though that the Trust, Children's Trust, has gone out of the Council as a TECL company. So the Trust went live the 1st of November. It was quite seamless. You know, in some ways people wanted a big hurrah, but due to COVID, that presented as a challenge. But in terms of paying rations and people's email addresses and things, it just was quite smooth. Staff were very pleased. They weren't now called Children First Northamptonshire, because that's a very long email address, so they've all changed. So they saw that as a positive. Before the Trust went live, we had Ofsted in, and Ofsted did what was called a focused assurance visit. From there, a letter was published, and that letter came out on the 4th of December. Some of you may have seen it. If you're interested, it is on the Ofsted website, or we can include it in the minutes. What was really good to see is that they could actually see some improvements, some tangible improvements across the board. Still lots more work to do, but on the right trajectory, which is a really good point at which for the Trust to go forward. The way that the Trust will be managed from the local authority is that there is a contractual, operational and a strategic management groups, 2 groups that will manage that contractual arrangement. And what I think is really important, especially with regards to schools and Schools Forum, is that we ensure that the links remain and actually get stronger. And you know, I think some of the fears around the Trust sitting outside a local authority, that might make it feel as though they are further away, but in actual fact we need to work harder just to make sure those bridges that go across are quite firm, and especially around the fact that there has been some really good work being done during the COVID period of social care and schools working together, and we need to build on that as we go forward. But the final bits for the Trust to sign them off really is around support services, so around the data, HR, things like that, which is just being looked into, and that should all happen by the end of March.
Okay, thank you, Kathy. Any questions, comments, colleagues, either by hand or by comment in the chat box? Anything that you've got Kathy there now, anything that you want to ask her? Okay, well, thank you very much, Kathy. I think it's as always, it's useful for us to be kept updated and to know just at what position we actually are. And thank you, the same thing to you, Sharon. So we've got that bigger picture as we look at the rest of the items that are on the Schools Forum agenda. So if we can then move on to item 4, which Beth, you're going to talk to us about the 2021 DSG budgets and the monitoring and what that's telling us.
Yes, that's right. Thank you. So I'll just share my presentation. So the update on the monitoring position is actually a favourable one compared to the last monitoring. We've got an outturn forecast position of 4.1 million overspent. If you remember, that was 5.3 million, 5.28 million projection in October. It's mainly due to changes in high needs block pressures as our sort of projections are locked down a bit more closely. Some of the special schools work where we get their autumn returns in to see their new starters and leavers. And also the work that the Gwyn's team are doing to place this extreme increase in requests for special places that we've had. I think we're seeing the fruits of those labours. So the pressures as they're currently standing are 2.8 million overspend prediction on the out of county placements. The increased special school demand looks like approximately 1 million overspent, though that's on a backdrop of having increased that budget by 4 million in 2021. So there is, although that overspend forecast has come down from October's meeting, it is still quite a massive increase compared to 1920. The increased demand for provision in mainstream settings looks like we'll have about a 1.2 million overspend, and the alternative provisions budget is looking like a £300,000 overspend. Those overspends are still being offset by a SEN unit provision underspend of about 900,000. Looking at that in comparison to the overall DSG pot, that's come down slightly, so it's about a 0.63% overspend in comparison to the whole DSG before recoupment. So that wouldn't, if we were remaining within one county council, that wouldn't trigger the need for a recovery plan to be submitted to DfE. This is just looking at the risks and opportunities in the schools block. There hasn't been a significant change compared to the last monitoring in the schools block. Still got the same slide here, essentially with a small change in the top line. There's still possibilities of rates gains on academy converters. As the valuation office goes out and visits schools, if the rates values go up, then we have to pay more. If they go down, then it might be historically backdated to give us a refund. At the moment, we've got a small gain in there of 100,000. Again, the deficit budgets and cost of redundancies, that's very subject to fluctuation, just depends on who converts, when they convert. So that's just to state that risk there. This is just going through again the high needs block. The current overall forecast overspend on the high needs block is 4.4 million. I've talked about those. There's an agenda item later on where Gwyn will talk about the detail within each of these areas. The early years forecast is still a nil variance to budget. We're in an unusual position with the early years, in that normally we'd have to set the funding formula at the beginning of the year, and then we wouldn't be able to change that. So we would have some kind of up or down, because the way the grant is set is quite difficult to predict, because it happens based on 2 censuses, one of which happens within year, and we get the result after the end of the financial year in July. This year we're being because of COVID-19, we're able to change what we're doing in year to support settings. And so there's a piece of work being done by the early years team and myself at the moment to model what we think is happening, and we'll bring that to you in January, or Jess will bring that to you in January. I would just like to share the detailed appendix to this report, to get that up on screen to mention and to point out a part that I'll need to talk about when we get onto agenda item 9. Sorry, this is very tiny, so I'll zoom in. There are some lines shown in the appendix, which have always been there. They're always reported to Schools Forum. So there are 3 lines, one on row 29, pensions and other general expenses, which is a very small amount within the schools block, 86,000. There's a line within the early years, pensions and other general expenses, 236,000. And within high needs, a much higher amount, 1.3 million. These are historical and they relate to teachers' pensions. There was a much larger one historically in the schools block, but when the schools central services block was created, the schools block pensions were moved into that block. What I'm going to be bringing to you in the schools central services block paper is I'm pulling those into that decision that you make to agree the central historical funding to correctly align where I think they should be sitting. So going forward, there isn't this these lines that aren't considered as part of the central block paper.
So
happy to take any questions.
So really, that's just a technical movement of funds between blocks. Is that correct?
Yes, it's just housekeeping, which I'll explain
Okay.
later in that item 9.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions, comments on the DSG budgets and monitoring? Clearly a better position than we were in, but still, as you say, if we had a 4 million increase into the high needs block, and we are still 4.4 million overspent. That's a very large amount of money. You mentioned there, Beth, about that 0.63 wasn't enough of a percentage to trigger a plan for the county as a whole. What about the disaggregation?
With the disaggregation, I think it does really depend on where we finally land at the end of the year in terms of
okay.
There is a difference. There is going to be a difference between the north and the west because the DFE look at the overall DSG pot and including the reserves. And in the west, we have the PFI schools, which have a large reserve relating to that one of the PFI contracts. So it sort of nets off any underspend. So there wouldn't be likely to be a problem in the west.
Okay.
But the north doesn't have that PFI reserve to offset it.
So more likely.
It's more likely, but it's still under 1%.
But we don't know.
Moment.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Beth. Thank you. Sharon, if you have something to add.
Yes, I think the issue around the 1% issue that we regardless of where we end up this year, the pressure in the north and the west with regard to alternative provision, the high needs funding block means that we need to very early get on the agenda next year how we start to do things differently, because that pressure is increasing. And whilst it might be that we're not at that 1% levy just yet, the direction of travel is such that we need to look at that overspend in the alternative provision area, but also the outer county high needs funding aspect and placement. So I think, as we've said before in previous meetings, that's something we need to get together across the system, understand the landscape for the north and the west, and have a really clear approach around how we can change the system to keep more of our children in mainstream education where we can, look at the profile of our special schools and the children accessing those. And I know that Gwyn's going to come and talk about that in some of her slides later on. But I think it's a really prescient point, Joe, because regardless of where we end up, we're absolutely going to need to be watching those particular areas and the pressure in those areas. So I think for myself and Kathy, that will be quite a key area of focus for us, with conversations starting from January about discussions with school leaders about how we change the system and support each other.
And just from a whole forum perspective, I think it might be useful to know, you know, how many of our statistical neighbours have one of those recovery plans.
Yeah, and we've got, so working with Beth, we're looking at who our new statistical neighbours are to absolutely do that piece of work. So if you can bear with us, but it's just to note that you're absolutely right. We need to focus on it, and we need to get that on this agenda and in our general conversations with schools.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon. Rob has asked a question about when does movement between blocks cease?
We'll be bringing all of the final budgets in January. Normally we'd like to do that in December to try and get as much sorted before Christmas as possible. But as I'll talk about on one of the agenda items, we haven't had the settlement yet. So we'll bring the final budgets in January. So that meeting's on the 19th and we have to submit them on the 21st.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thanks, Rob. Okay, thank you very much, Beth. Moving on to Chris.
I think I'm going to start this and then.
Oh, right, okay.
Chris. So I'll just share my screen again. So just starting with a couple of slides that we brought in October, just to refresh the position. We have within the schools block, a portion of the funding, a very small part of it is allocated specifically for growth. In 2021, that was 4.4 million. I was previously sort of working on an estimate of 4 million because I knew that the growth would drop. Been given indicative figures by the ESFA of 3.8 million. So although there's a drop there, we do also have I think less requirement for new numbers, less schools opening than we initially predicted for 21-22. So that's still adequate for what we need. There are two ways in which we in Northamptonshire distribute that growth pot. It goes through weighted numbers, as we call it, which are numbers of new classes or new schools, where we estimate that the numbers that they will need in their budget for September. We took that to you in October and that's been agreed. And we're bringing the second part to you, which Chris will talk about in a moment, which is the growth fund, which the policy was also agreed by yourselves last meeting. And now we're bringing to you the split of the budgets. Over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Beth. Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, as Beth has just alluded to, the Pupil Growth Fund is the mechanism by which all local authorities provide revenue funding to any existing school that either extends at the request of that local authority and is a mechanism that we provide revenue funding for new schools to become operational. At the last meeting, we agreed the Pupil Growth Fund policy, and the forum also voted on an increase to the rates that we provide to schools when they agree to extend at the request of the local authority. Obviously, those rates are set by Schools Forum, and the new rates are now £56,000 per primary school, per 30 pupils, and £79,000 for secondary schools. We undertook an action to bring back the split that the North and the West would require to fund growth in each area from April 21 onwards, and the figures you have in front of you are the amounts each unitary authority will require to fund growth in each area moving forwards. Obviously, these figures only relate to the 21-22 financial year. So the total gross budget for the West is just a shade under £1.6 million and just a shade under £1.1 million in the North. As part of the growth funding, due to differences in the way maintained schools and academies are funded, all local authorities are able to recoup the amount that is paid to academies for the April to August period each year. So from those gross figures, 0.6 million will be recouped in the West unitary area and £390,000 will be recouped in the North. That gives us a net budget position for each unitary authority of £0.99 million in the West and £0.7 million in the North. Next slide, please, Beth. I mean, this very informative slide is just for me to provide you all with a bit of context about how that money is being used in the county currently and will be for the 21-22 financial year. From 2010 onwards, Northamptonshire saw unprecedented growth in terms of the demand for primary school numbers right across the county. And that growth took place over a period of 5 to 6 years. During that period, the Pupil Growth Fund was used almost in its entirety to fund primary growth. That trend has obviously changed in recent years. The birth rates and the factors that did drive growth over the first part of the last decade have now changed. The birth rate plateaus, obviously things like Brexit impacted on the amount of migration into the county. And we're now seeing a far greater split of the growth fund being used to fund new pupil places, whether it be in the form of permanent extensions, new schools, or temporary bulge capacity across the secondary phase of education. For 21-22, you're looking at a 60%, 40% split when you're looking at growth across the secondary and primary phases of education in favour of the secondary phase. And that trend is forecast to continue for the foreseeable future. Next slide, please, Beth. Thanks. So in terms of the actions we're asking Forum to vote on, or each shadow Forum to vote on today, that would be to agree to growth fund budgets for both the West Unitary Authority at a value of £0.99 million and in the North £0.7 million. Thanks very much.
Do we have any questions before the vote?
I think there's just a question from Sandra, and it's about the recoupment from academies and why is there that recoupment from the academies? Is that based on pupil numbers? Is there perhaps a little bit more explanation about that recoupment? I think is what Sandra is seeking.
Would you like me to explain, Chris? 'Cause it's
I would very much like you to explain that.
part of my budget tool. We submit the individual schools' budgets, the formula funding, on an April to March basis. The funding, the recoupment of the academies' individual schools' budgets comes off the DSG that we receive. But when we're then paying funding directly to academies from our local DSG, that amount is then, it's actually a reversal of recoupment. So the amount that the government takes off our grant for academies is termed recoupment, but they reduce our recoupment if we're paying them directly.
Sandra, does that help?
Hopefully my face isn't too obvious. I suppose maybe more simply, is the money definitely going to be returned? So therefore the amounts that we're expected to vote on now, is that, like, you know, is there a chance that could change because that recoupment at the moment isn't sitting with the local authority, I assume?
It can change, and all of the expenditure side can change here. We'd be setting the budget, and any expenditure that didn't happen, the budget would then roll forward at the end of the year, would become an DSG underspend. But if we made expenditure for those academies, we would get that recoupment reduced to that value.
Can I have another question?
Yeah, go ahead, Sandra.
So the figures that we're looking at now on screen, is that based on pupil numbers in the two areas, West and North? Or
that's a Chris question, I think.
Yeah, so the figures you're seeing in front of you now are based upon the amount of new places that both unitary authorities will be required to deliver in their areas. Mm-hmm. There's a small contingency that's been built into both the West and the North's figures there. but 90% of the figures that you're looking at there is based on actual growth that will need to occur to ensure that both unitary authorities meet their statutory obligations of providing a sufficiency of school places in their respective areas.
Thank you.
That makes more sense now, Sandra. I think it's not the easiest one. The recoupment of the growth fund is interesting. Okay, so if Chair, can I just, are we voting on this separately? Not Chair, Secretary, are we voting on this Secretary? Sorry, I'm the Chair.
I was enjoying my elevation there.
Are we voting on this separately?
Not at this stage.
Okay.
If Forum can just vote. And Chair, I was going to suggest, as we have so many people on the call, whether it might be more practical to ask if anyone wants to vote against or abstain, and we'll take everyone else's voting for.
Yeah, okay. So we'll do it by exception at this point in terms of voting. So the vote that we have in front of us is to agree the growth fund budgets of 0.99 million for the West and 0.7 million for the North. So if we could just, if it's possible, Secretary, can you see everybody?
I can't, no. Beth, could you?
Beth, could you? Yeah, stop sharing, please, Beth, so we get everyone back on screen. Thank you.
That's better.
Okay. So if we do this as the Secretary has suggested, which is that anybody who is against, if they could please indicate that they are against the vote.
Can't see any against.
I can't see anybody at this point. Is there anybody who wishes to abstain? If you can indicate using the reactions, either by a thumbs up or some kind of message from the reactions box. I can't see anybody who wishes to abstain. If we have missed you, please let us know now. Pop out of mute and say aye or whatever, but otherwise we will take it that that vote is carried. Secretary, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you everybody. Okay, so we're moving on then to Gwyn, who's going to give us an update on high needs, which, following what we looked at earlier in Beth's presentation, is quite appropriate, and you're planning for the future, Gwyn.
Yet again, would help if I unmute. Good afternoon, everyone. Right. Okay, thank you. Right, Beth, are you in control of the slides? She says.
Sorry, I'm just struggling to find that presentation.
That's all right.
No, I found it. It's number 6. Yeah, sorry.
That's all right. Just to sort of reiterate what Sharon was saying, Beth and I are actually meeting next week to start looking at how we can, in a way, we're going to assume that we are under a recovery plan requirement. So we're going to look at the analysis we need to do so that we can bring that to Forum as soon as possible. So, you know, as looking at it as though it was a worst case scenario, but obviously we're not in that at the moment, so that we can be prepared and hopefully alleviate some of the pressures. So just so you know, that works.
That probably might help us with some solutions, as well as if we assume that we are in that position.
Absolutely. So I thought we'll look at it that way, and then we should be ahead of the game, she says, hopefully. Okay, so right. So what I want to cover in this presentation, you can see there, it's 6 items. So I'm going through the different types of provision just so you can see what the position is at the moment. And I'm giving 3-year trends on those where I can, and then look at what our continuing demand pressures are, and then look at the high need reserves that was allocated by Forum, and where we're looking at investor save considerations for the future. So if we can go to the next one, please, Beth. Okay, so this is looking at the additional high needs funding that is allocated through to mainstream provisions. So the top section is around high needs funding applications. So those are the ones obviously that are for young people without an education, health and care plan, but to support the schools where they are putting in additional support that is over and above the notional SEN and the expectation on mainstream schools. As you can see, there does seem to be a drop in the 2021. Now, I mean, obviously, this has been the strangest year I think any of us have ever seen, and we hope we will never see again. So part of that is probably around that, because actually applications for high needs funding have reduced in the time of lockdown, etc., which is in contrast to EHC plans, but I'll explain that later. But also actually, because the number of EHC plans is increasing significantly, then the top-up funding is going through EHC plans rather than through high needs funding to an extent. So I think that's certainly explains some of the reduction from 1920 to 2021, where there's similar numbers, but the actual amount of money seems to have reduced. Then if we look at the second section, which looks at both individual payments through EHC plans, but also we do look at notional SEN support in mainstream school, and where a school has a significant number of SEN pupils where their notional SEN allocation does not seem to cover the requirements of up to the 6,000 for those young people. We do look at those on a school by school basis to try and support in a more generalised rather than only on an individual basis. And that is, unfortunately, it's sort of all included within these figures. We can't separate those out at this time. So as you can see, both the numbers and then therefore the value of funding being devolved to the mainstream schools has increased year on year. Secondary numbers have reduced slightly between 1920 and 2021. I haven't got an exact reason for that. Some of that will be that actually quite often when a young person gets a plan in secondary, then the chances are they will be moved through to a special school. And obviously I'll be doing the special school numbers shortly. So then additional arrangements, these are quite interesting. And as you can see, there's been quite a significant growth in those. And that is where we are adding additional to what would be normally the maximum top up, or agreeing a top up for a school. And this can be a number of occasions. So it can be where a parent absolutely wishes for their child to remain in mainstream, even if they have significant needs that potentially us as professionals would say they need to be in a special provision. But it's our duty to support a mainstream provision wherever we can. So we do support the school with additional resource to do that. Some of this is also where, because of the pressures on the special school, and we're asking mainstream schools to maintain a young person in mainstream whilst we seek specialist provision, and then we provide additional support to enable that. So those sorts of arrangements, which are indicative of the pressure the system is under, that they're increasing. But just so everybody knows, we don't just leave it to schools to manage without having those conversations. Next one, please, Beth. Okay, the alternative provision budget. So following the return to school after lockdown in July, actually the exclusion figures are showing a slight reduction on last year. I think we'd all say that the actual figures are probably still too high, but it is slightly lower than last year. However, the providers have requested increases, especially our two main providers, in the top-up rates, which obviously impact on the budget. But we are working on a new memorandum of understanding for all providers to ensure that there is a consistency, and we're looking at value for money across that sector.
Can I just ask, when they ask for an increase in top-up plans, what the rationale was why there should be an increase in top-up rates?
Right. I mean, very much it's the same as the rationale that independent sectors, etc., also provide. It's mainly down to the fact they're saying their costs are increasing. So these are, it depends on the providers. Some of them are academies, but some of them are independent alternative providers. And so they are looking at the pensions and the salaries and the cost of maintaining buildings, etc.
But if you're an academy, you get your pension grants from the government anyway.
Yes. But yes, so as I said, it's not just one thing, and it depends on the provider. The different providers are doing it for different reasons.
Okay, thank you.
That's why we want to produce a memorandum of understanding that will very much more clearly lay out our expectations as well as what they can expect from us.
Okay, Kath has pointed out about there being a higher number of support staff in the alternative provision sector.
Yeah, I think that's what we've got to remember. It's very easy, shorthand, alternative provision. It's very easy just to think about young people who are excluded, but of course hospital outreach is also an alternative provider, which is a very, very different type of provision.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so the next one, please, just to put some figures on that. Thank you. So, as you can see, there's the budget has increased significantly, and the final spend against forecast is that we're still forecasting an overspend on that, which Beth has already shown. And the two main providers are CE and Spires for excluded pupils. And you can see what the 2019-20 and 2021 variance is there, and then there's other DFE and non-DFE registered provisions. We try very hard not to use non-DFE registered provisions because it's but obviously some of the providers do so, but then they're expected to have very strict controls over that, in the same way if schools were using non-DFE registered provisions to support young people. Tuition increase has been significant, and some of that is because we have doubled the minimum expectation of tuition we will deliver for young people while we're waiting to get them back into a provision. So obviously that has had a significant impact on the budget. Okay, next one, please. It's now into our special school and SEN unit budgets. We've been increasing places in our maintained special schools and units, and will continue to do so in 21-22. There have been additional top-ups to special schools and units to support the rate of increase that they've had to absorb for us, and also as acknowledgement of the complexity of children's needs. And due to the impact of COVID and the change, unfortunately, consultations that we were going to take forward on split site for special schools and to look at changing the SEN unit funding to the RAS funding, which is the funding we use for special schools, sorry. We haven't managed to do it this year, but we will be planning to do that within each of the unitary authorities next year. And the next couple of slides give just an indication of the additional places that we've either agreed or are ongoing at the moment. So these are for the north. As you can see, we're looking at all of the areas in the north, and that covers both special school and additional unit places. Some are only in early discussions, but some we're actively or have already started. And the next one is a similar setup for the west. Next, please, Beth. Thank you. Sorry. Again, that's across all areas. Unfortunately, we've not yet been able to start the major expansion of a special school in South Northants, as we've not had a free school bid from the DFE. But, you know, we're ever hopeful that once they're able to concentrate on some other things, that we might get a round of bids for that, and so that will be very, very high on the agenda, that we actually have a special school bid opening for the South Northants area. Okay, thanks, Beth. And then the last but by no means least, it's the independent provision and then the other county provision. So we absolutely do try not to send to independent until it's absolutely necessary. And as you can see, actually, the number of new placements is reducing. And some of that must be the impact of the fact that we are increasing with the support of our own special schools and mainstream schools with units, and indeed mainstream schools who are maintaining young people, to not have to send so many children out. But the average cost, as you can see, is increasing year on year. And that average cost is much more than if we were placing locally. So we still want that drive to continue, that we actually have our own placements, because apart from the fact local places for local children, obviously transport costs aren't included in any of the costs I've got here, and they can be significant, and they can be at least half, if not more, of the total funding for a child to go out of county. And so we will continue to try and drive that down as much as possible by creating our own places. And as I said, the majority are still either for social, emotional and mental health or autism reasons. And the autistic spectrum ones are those that mainly either have behaviours that challenge, or they are the high functioning autism that find it impossible to manage within our mainstream sector, especially in our very large secondary schools, but they need to have the national curriculum, which our special schools don't deliver the full curriculum, or it's much more difficult for them to do so, as they are learning difficulty schools in the main. And then the last slide on numbers is about other authority maintained an academy and mainstream special. As you all know, we link in, or we border many other local authorities. So for some young people, it's actually nearer to attend a school in another authority. That's mainstream as well as special schools. And these are the numbers and costs for that. So they are going up, they are significant. Some of that is because all authorities are finding a pinch on the budget, especially in the high needs. And so they are becoming much more strict, and we are doing the same. If young people move into our authority, that actually they're asking for the place funding for a year until, you know, to tide them over until the EASFA funding catches up, etc. So that means that the costs for 1 year will be more than subsequent years. But as I said, we're ensuring that we follow exactly the same route for ours, but we tend to be an exporter on balance rather than an importer of young people in the authority. So, I mean, it's possible that these numbers might rise, but it's something we're looking at. And as I said, for some young people, they are the nearest school, so it's very difficult to argue otherwise.
Paul has a question about independent provision, about where the children are coming from to the independent provision. So I don't know whether that's a northwest kind of picture.
Well, there is a northwest picture. It is for both of them, because there are there's slightly more in the west. I mean, we did do that analysis, and I think I probably brought that before. What we can do is, I was going to do it on a later slide, but I'll tell you now. The contract of Mastodon, which was to look at the sufficiency, we allocated the funding for that. I've actually got a meeting with them on Tuesday, because with the first pass of the first analysis for the county. And one of the things there, that's exactly what they're looking at. They've split it north and west for sufficiency, and they're looking at where these young people who live in the west and or the north actually go to school. So that will include where, you know, the percentages that are going out to independent. So as soon as we've had a look at that data and we've verified it, we will bring that to the schools forum, so you can have another look at the full data for that, which is absolutely up to date.
Thank you, Gwyn. Paul, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you.
Joe, sorry, Sharon, just to add, obviously, in terms of the disaggregation of DSG, we've done the analysis that looks at making sure the money follows the children linked to the local authority area. So that part of the budgetary work has also happened with Beth and the team.
Okay, so is the budget following the children based upon the schools that they attend or where they live?
The mixture, it depends on the funding stream. Where it's schools block, it's based on the school census, but a lot of the high needs, it's based on the postcode of the child. In some cases, the postcode doesn't match, but it's the responsible authority of the child.
Okay, thank you.
So, I mean, what will happen with the split is there will be more import-export between the west and the north. But it will follow the same process as it does for other out of county.
And I think, as we discussed, it's the kind of thing where we're hopefully one side of the divide is not charging more to the other side of the divide. We have to hope there's a quid pro quo between our two authorities.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll all come out in the wash, Joe. Right. So this is just giving a sort of a graphic idea of demand pressures and where there's been increases in the number of EHC plans in the East Midlands region. This one is, and so you can see. I mean, it goes back all the way to 2010. But if you have a look for us, I can hardly see it, and I'm colourblind, so it's absolutely useless being colours for me. But the increase last year was about 5%. I mean, our total for 2020, which is based on the January figures, was 4,337. I think scarily we're just planning for the SEN2 return, which obviously will take place next January, and we're looking at about 4,700 now. So it shows that our increase is continuing to rise. And in fact, it's probably got faster than otherwise. So that just gives you a pictorial version of how we sit within the region.
Is this public data, or is this data that you have within the local authority?
It's region. I mean, it's data from the SEN2 returns. So the table at the bottom is all public data. It's just we've got a dashboard, regional dashboard, so they do the nice, pretty graphs for us. But
yeah, it's very interesting, very useful information. So I was just wondering who could access it. Okay. Any questions, anybody, on Gwen's presentation? I think what you're saying to us is, Gwen, is that the pressures continue.
Yeah.
And that, as we say, you need to be really looking at whether planning for the fact that we may well be in the position of having to have a plan for next year. And then if we don't, we've done all the work.
Yeah. I mean, if we whip through, sorry, Joe, if we just another couple of slides, one with a bit more data, which if people have got any questions with all of this, if anyone wants to ask me a question now, obviously, or just drop me an email, then I will respond as soon as possible. But if we go to the last slide, Beth, which is just so as I said, so for the reserve and for futures, really. So the Mastodon contract, as I say, hopefully we'll get we will get the first iteration of data next week. And so I have to sanity check it, obviously, but hopefully we'll start having some information where we can start having some really good discussions and understanding of our sufficiency and where the gaps are for both of the new local authorities. And the other thing is the SEMH project. This was something we started towards the beginning of last academic year. It's crazy, isn't it? I don't know where the time's gone. And unfortunately, things have sort of got in the way. However, I think because it is just so vital we get started, what I've done is I've just set up that we have, and it's free, so I'm not going to start using the reserve at the moment, but I would like to keep that in order to seed fund projects for next year, obviously. But I'm working with the DFE funded organisation Whole School Send, which is part of NASON, to set up a project to work with some of our designated special provisions, either units or just resource provisions for mainly SEMH and ASD, but not exclusively so, 5 in the north and 5 in the west, to provide them with some very focused training on every leader's a leader of Send and Send data sets, etc., to look to produce a plan with them on how they can support through outreach in their localities. And I think so it's a pilot of the training and setting up the plans. And then what I would like to do as soon as we've sort of moved in, probably sort of February, March time, we'll have the feedback on that and to look and see how we can develop that for the future and expand that. Because obviously I'll want to open it up to many more schools if it's a successful project. So it's just a very limited time project till the end of March to see what we think is possible to actually plan to support all schools to make that difference for children with SEND within the mainstream sector.
Thank you, Gwen. And obviously the Mastodon, there was some initial people were saying, well, how will it help us? It seems as if this is something that could really be useful for us. I know that's what we thought it would be, but it seems to be being borne out more by what you're finding.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Any comments, colleagues?
I think, Gwyn, it's probably just worthwhile mentioning our profile in the county, just thinking for new shadow members, that whilst we have got the pressure in the budget now, we have managed quite well up until now, nationally compared to other local authorities. But we are absolutely at the point where we do need to do the things that you've just described, Joe, in terms of looking at how we support our mainstream partners, but also how we change the system. I don't know if you just want to add anything else around that, Gwen, in relation to the, we've talked before, I think, for colleagues about the money that leaves the county and how if we could change the system, keep the money in the county, in our schools and our children local. But Gwen, perhaps just give a bit of context about how we've fared and what our current position, just for new colleagues that have joined today.
Okay, yeah, I mean, as it happens, as a county, we've done reasonably well, and it's only in the last couple of years that the pressure has really started to tell, which is very different from other colleagues, especially in the region. I mean, we're currently doing a regional bit of work to actually see where everybody is, and I don't think there's now anybody that doesn't have significant pressure that's similar, if not more than ours, within high needs funding. And also, actually, when I talk to them, for very, very similar reasons. We are very well served with special schools in our county, but what that does is actually it then produces the demand to an extent. And so it's about how we look at things, go back to basics really, and look at the early identification and intervention to see whether there's things we can do right at the beginning, and it could well be in the early years sector. So, you know, I will be looking to early years providers and nursery schools, etc., as well as in the school sector, to actually really understand and intervene early and put the funding in then in order to avoid the escalation and then the escalation into specialist provisions and or, you know, if necessary, the outer county. But it's also looking at who our complex young people are and how can we actually make the provision within our county rather than just moving them outside. So it's, you know, we need to look at both sides. You can't look at one without the other. But if we keep just filling in the top end, then we never get the chance to actually look at trying to redress the balance at the bottom end. And obviously, as you saw, the average cost of an out-of-county placement is 55, where I think the average cost for an in-county specialist placement is around about 30 to 35. So for every child, if we could save, we send out, we save £20,000, that gives us a hell of a lot more places to actually fund within our own authority, and that's the aim really. So it's a lot of work to do, and I need, you know, we need to be working together, the whole sector working together, and that includes our health colleagues and social care colleagues as well, to really make the whole difference.
Thank you very much, Gwen. That's been really helpful. I echo there what Muriel has said. Very, very useful update. Thank you very much. We are 2 minutes ahead of time, so that's brilliant. If I can move over now to Beth, who's going to talk to us about 2021-22 school budgets and a consultation proposal.
Thank you. I probably have a lot shorter time slot for this than is on the agenda. We haven't yet had the settlement, so I haven't been able to do the final modelling to bring you a more finished position that I would normally do at this time of year. So instead, I thought I'd give you the timescales and explain what we're going to have to do regards consultation. We do have a requirement, if we change anything in the schools' budgets, to consult with all schools, as well as then bringing that consultation back to Schools Forum for the ultimate. It's not for a vote for the schools' budgets, but we have to consult with Schools Forum after consulting with schools. The budgets have to be submitted on the 21st of January this year, and our Schools Forum in January is on the 19th. So we're expecting the settlement this week, possibly on the 18th on Friday. So we'll have a very quick turnaround for the modelling of each budget for the schools. We've got two separate tools from the Education Skills Funding Agency with which to do that. We've modelled them currently using the October 19 census data, and that's indicating that within the financial settlement we were given in July as the provisional figures, it does look as though we'd be able to afford for schools to be on the national funding formula locally. But obviously we can't guarantee that until I've got the final settlement, the final October 2020 census data, populated in those budget tools. So we'll be aiming to model that very quickly, turn it around so that we can go out with a letter to head teachers to ask the sort of fundamental consultation questions that we ask each year around what would your opinion be on top slicing the schools block for the high needs funding pot up to a maximum of 0.5%. At the moment, there isn't much on the draft models, on the indicative models, there isn't much headroom within, especially there isn't any headroom in the north. There's a very tiny amount within the west on the draft models. So if we are top slicing, then it will reduce, either we'll have to apply a funding cap, as we have in prior years. The national funding formula that's been published in July currently models with a 12% cap. That's looking at the per pupil rate increase year on year. And we'd probably be looking to bring that down to about 2%, 3% increase year on year if we were looking to make a significant contribution to the high needs block. So as in previous years, we'll be planning to ask heads what their opinion and governors and bursars what their opinion would be for those top slices. But there aren't any other fundamental changes to the schools formula. We're very closely aligned to the national funding formula. We'll be applying the same rates. So at the moment, our modelling is very close to the government's published national funding formula budgets. So really, it's just a heads up to say that we're going to have a very quick turnaround time for the feedback.
Good job. There's nothing much else to do at Christmas, isn't it?
That's it. Yeah, it always seems to fall over school holidays.
I wonder why. Thank you very much, Beth. So we're looking for we would want to encourage head teacher colleagues to respond quickly. I think that will need to be the message that goes out, that there needs to be a quick response, because it's nothing to do with your fault. And this is not NCC's fault at all. It is to do with the fact that we've had the information very, very late, but people will need to respond quickly. And I think if everyone can get that message out there to schools, we do want to know what schools think, but we will need a quick response. So as is always, things happen at the 11th hour. Okay, thanks very much, Beth. So if there are no comments from anyone with regards to the consultation proposal and the budget, we will take a 10-minute comfort break and see you all back here at 14:28. Thank you very much. keeping very well to time. Hello everybody, sorry I was just waiting for the kettle to boil so you didn't have to listen to it while I was on unmute. Okay, I'm hoping that we've got a number of people now starting to return to the meeting. We saved a few meetings, a few minutes, thank you very much Beth, because that was much shorter than we were anticipating. So we will come back. I'm thinking we've got quite a few people with us. I'm not sure we had everybody who was here before. Fewer videos. However, Sharon, welcome back everybody. I think we will start. Sharon, you're going to talk to us along with Carrie as well. Welcome to Carrie, about the combined budgets annual report.
Yeah, if Beth, if you can pop the slides up for me, please. So I'll do the first few and then I'll hand over for Carrie to talk about her service area. So what follows is an annual report in terms of the monies we have available through the schools block combined services. So next slide. There's a degree of repetition on the first few slides, so we'll move through these at some speed so that we can get through the sort of level of detail. So the overall budget is 2.3 million, and this page identifies the areas in which the money is spent. And what I'll do is give you an update for those areas that I will talk to, and then Carrie, as the strategic manager for learning skills and education, will pick up the work for her direct services working with schools and other providers. Okay, so this slide shows the figures. In terms of where we currently are, it's absolutely the case that this funding supports a range of services and activities that are key for schools, the local authority in and of itself in terms of its service provision, which I'll explain as we go through, but also is broadly obviously reaches pupils, parents, but also with a specific focus on safeguarding of children. There's obviously an element of this that's a historic funding arrangement. Okay, the next slide shows how the money will be split based on our disaggregation principles for the North and the West. So it follows the key areas of expenditure, which are those historic areas, but then just shows how that will be allocated for the budget for next year, where we have 2 new unitaries at play. Okay, next slide, Beth. So we have our Northamptonshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership, which is obviously a county-wide structure that will continue to operate as a county-wide structure. This year we had a contribution to really focus on safeguarding in education. So that's working across all of our provisions in Northamptonshire, including into early years settings, and making sure that we have a clear and distinct offer to support safeguarding in education. I think for colleagues that know this team, the team is headed up by Debbie Carey, and we've done an awful lot of work this year, as we do every year, but obviously with a really clear focus in relation to COVID and our safeguarding communications that heads will recall at the start of COVID, around really being very clear in relation to our vulnerable learners, vulnerable either to social care or EHCP, our SEND children that Gwyn was talking about, but also broadly picking up on wider safeguarding issues, so we will get involved in individual school circumstances, both in a supportive and challenge role where we need to. And from time to time, we'll also link in with Ofsted safeguarding inquiries as they come in. And as this slide sort of gives an overview, so ongoing contextual awareness, raising education, passporting any changes to policy in terms of keeping children safe in education, for example, but also making sure that there are regular events hosted by Debbie and the team, so that the partnership and the schools and early years providers can be supported and keep on agenda the safeguarding message. So that programme of work will continue, and that will continue across local authority spaces both in the north and west for next year. Okay, next slide. So we're making changes. So again, looking at the safeguarding partnership, the business office that supports the partnership, that was historically located in the old social care part of the organisation. With the formation of the trust and the work of the safeguarding partnership, which is more than just social care, a decision was made that that team would move into the education service, so make sure we've got that universal reach, so not just about children known to social care or targeted early help. So this business unit, and that's headed up by Lisa Walsh for colleagues that know Lisa, now reports directly into Debbie Carey, and is sitting in my safeguarding and education, or our safeguarding and education function. And I think there's some real opportunities for that in terms of making sure that we have a focused and clear agenda, and that we take some benefit of working more closely with the training and offer through the safeguarding partnership. So that's just an update for you in terms of the work will continue but hosted in education. Next slide. So just for those colleagues, and again thinking in relation to our new colleagues that have joined us today, so if you wanted to know more about the work of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, then there's the annual report, the available e-learning training offer, which is well used and with good feedback, and then an overview on face-to-face training. So that's links for colleagues that might find that of use. Moving on. A subject we've talked about often, Joe. So there is £1 million contribution to support the work of our key activities for our looked after children, and also for support for our children when they need to maintain access to school, perhaps because they've gone to live with a relative, for example, who then might require transport to support the young person at school. And then also individual monies around the supporting role of the MASH. If there are questions around the MASH, I might hand those over to Kathy because she's closer to that than me. But nonetheless, there is this amount of money committed every year to support the work that we do for our most vulnerable children. Next slide. So what follows, I won't read them all out because you've got them, but this shows the work that we have done year to date around this particular focused areas of work. So as I talked about, we have the transport to make sure that we can support our children in school. We are performing very well in terms of making sure our children in care attend school, with that percentage there for your information. We also, as I said, really focused with Kathy and the team looking at making sure where possible and where appropriate that our children in care, so the CIC, sorry, for colleagues who don't know, is Children in Care, acronym, sorry, I should have explained that. And we worked hard and well where it was appropriate to make sure that those children that we felt should be in school, where it's of their best interest during the initial COVID period, and we achieved 40%, which was a very good performance nationally. We also, this money also supports that ongoing relationship management and support for our children through contact arrangements. So this may be where they have contact time to meet friends and relatives as part of their care arrangement. And all of this work really ideally is focused on supporting the best outcomes for our children, providing that stability, continuity, both through school, through connected persons, and making sure that we continue a positive learning journey for our children in care, but also that we provide the stability in what can be difficult times, for example, through care proceedings. Next slide. We also, this money also contributes and supports the overall work of our MASH. So again, for colleagues that don't know, and I'm kicking myself for use of acronyms, Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub. So for those of you who don't know that, and so this is our, I'm sure you all do, this is all our initial service where colleagues and families, community contacts across the county would make a referral or a contact into our safeguarding hub. And then I think we've just listed here the number of referrals that we get. So these will be referrals of concern, where the safeguarding teams working in the Children's Trust will work with health professionals, concerned community members, school colleagues, early years colleagues, etc., to understand a specific issue and work through what is the appropriate level of support. And that works into partnership as well, police, etc. And I think that just gives you a list of the kind of work that we do, but also alludes to the fact that it isn't a county council provision, it is a wider structure working with a steering group that has health, police and education colleagues contributing to the work of the MASH. Okay, next slide. So now I'm going to hand over to Carrie. Carrie, if you take through yours, then I think you're going to hand back over to me for the education inclusion team. Should we pause there, Jo, and just take any questions?
Yes, because you know what, I'll ask a question about this one. So I'll start myself off with this one. So what I would like to say is thank you, Sharon, because that's the first time we've ever had any information about any impact or data that relates to the fieldwork family support. That's the first time we've ever had anything, so other than the stated aims of the service. So thank you very much for that. I guess it is for me, now that we actually see what is actually achieved, is that I understand the link to education, but some of it feels quite tenuous for that amount of money.
I think, as I said at the start, Jo, it's a historic arrangement. So it's been in place for many, many years. I don't know how many, Beth, you might know. And to be, I wasn't around at the point of time that those discussions were had. So, but it follows that this money was given to the local authority to support our vulnerable children and enable and support the reach and support into education. It is a historic decision. So I suppose that's an open question for the forums going forward around their view on that.
I think just to add that this is part of the historic funding, as Jo says. So if we stop this, if we reduce this budget, we don't get the funding in. That's part. This is part of the historical budget that's reducing 20% each year.
So as it reduces 20% each year, but the amount that we're giving remains the same, how does that work?
I'll get onto that in my slides, looking at the overarching central budget.
Thank you. And from Sandra, it's about the NSCB, there being an increase in need because of COVID, but there appears to be a reduced access to resources.
I'd need to look into that with Kathy. Reduced access to resources.
Did you just want to pick that up?
Yeah, sure. So certainly, as a group of schools, we're finding, and I, like I stated, anecdotally, we're seeing an increase in demand and an increase in potential referrals, but yet not a great deal in terms of what can be offered back to support those families. Often going to early help, so schools delivering the support and leading on that, rather than it being historically, I would argue whether it should have gone to help and prevention or even SIN historically. So very specific, but certainly at the moment, anecdotally, as a group of schools, we are looking at whether it's working, certainly in areas where we've got high deprivation and a lot more need.
So
probably
are you talking
not this forum.
Is that to do with MASH referrals and support in that way, or?
Yes, I suppose, but it's that kind of more global looking at, that seems like a lot of money, and I'm not, well, you probably established, I'm not really fully au fait with, up to speed with how everything is spent and what the outcomes are, though very helpful to know that we're seeing an improved picture based on what you've presented, Sharon. I think it seems to me like it's not necessarily still meeting the actual needs of our most vulnerable families.
And I think that's that picture about that very specific budget, which is about those very specific things that appear to relate to children in care and transport, and that historic picture whereby that money has been going out. And I think, you know, as Beth says, we'll pick up later on, is if the money coming in is less. My only concern, Beth, is that we've got to vote. Oh, we're not voting on this one. Sorry, we're not voting on this one. So I didn't want to take a vote before actually seeing what the issue was about if we vote to keep the same amount of money, but actually we're getting 20% less in every year into that budget line.
I could just add in quickly that the reason we've got enough room not to be cutting these services yet is because of the PFI move, where the funding was removed from the central and put through.
Right, okay.
But they also left it in central. So we've got a very fortunate position.
Right, so we've still got enough money to carry on doing this, but if we didn't, we might be looking at it much more closely.
I think next year might be different.
Okay, thank you. So that's where we would have to look at this much more closely going forward. Thank you very much. Thank you, Sharon. Is Carrie going to pick up from now?
Joe, sorry, can I just ask a quick question on that?
Yeah.
I've just got something I want to ask again. It's about the fieldwork grant. Do we know how much of that money is spent on school transport? And if that's quite substantial, then again, I guess it's a question of, is this the right pot for that to come from? Because
I think we can ask the question, James, to get a breakdown, but from my memory, the transport overall social care transport budget is quite significant, so I wouldn't think it's a huge percentage because I know how big the budget is. But I think we can have a look at, so if we were to break that down in terms of what proportion is for the contact arrangement for transport for MASH, I think that would give you that view. So if I speak with Emily, we can have a look at how we can do that. And then I think also, Joe, to your point, that would help them, and to Sandra's point in terms of, so where is it going? Who is it serving? What were those historical decisions? I think in a way, Sandra, your point is almost a different point that perhaps we need to come back and have a look at through some of the forums outside of the schools forum in terms of early health prevention, what you're currently seeing around referrals, whether we sort of take that into the trust landscape. But nonetheless, I think if we drill that data down and share that with you, I think it would help you to see how it's currently being apportioned, but then also help maybe those future discussions, given what Beth said about the future budget.
As I say, Sharon, that's the first time we've ever seen any numbers related to this item. So that is a step forward, but I think it needs to get much, much sharper if there's going to be any kind of indication of reducing funding, because then we need to know where it's going to know where we can cut it. Peter French.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Now, I may have misunderstood this because I don't claim to always understand finances, but as I understand it, we've got a budget for vulnerable children, and it's being reduced year on year by 20%, but we're covering it through PFI money at the moment. Is that right?
It's not PFI funding. The Central Schools Block funding, which I've got coming on next. There are two parts to the Central Schools Block. One part's historical. That was there was a technical windfall, if you want to call it that, when we moved the PFI funding from Central to Schools Block.
But the point is, we're getting a 20% cut year on year in money for vulnerable children. Is that, am I right in that?
It's the historical Central Block. Different LAs fund different things from it.
So I don't think we should accept that lying down. I think it's appalling that we're getting 20% cut for vulnerable children. I just think actually it's disgraceful. And I don't think we should sit here and say, oh, well, that's what we're going to get next year and we're covering it by PFI this year. I think we as a scrutiny committee should be complaining to the Department for Education loud and clear. 20% cut for vulnerable children, appalling. If that's
Peter, I guess that the point would be is that we have this, that's how we as a local authority have chosen to fund that. Other local authorities fund it in different ways. So there isn't necessarily a cut for vulnerable children. There's a cut to the central budget from which we have in the past chosen to fund that area of our work. Other local authorities, do they fund this through social care? How does this area of work get funded in other local authorities?
think as Beth described, different local authorities historically have used this combined services block in different ways. So I think the answer is there isn't a universal piece, but historically we've absolutely used some of this money in order to support our activities around vulnerable children, but you wouldn't necessarily see it being used that way, form and function throughout the country. So it's not a direct budget for vulnerable children in that sense, but as you've said, Joe, historically we've used some of this money through this combined budgets to support aspects of the local authority provision.
I guess that's what kind of lies behind my question about transport is, are we using this funding to supplement other budgets that you know, actually should that school transport come from social care or wherever that would ordinarily come from, and is this central service block being used to kind of cover shortfalls elsewhere, I guess?
I think it's an apposite question. I think we need to give you the data and then we need to have the discussion.
I think this is where the discussion over the years has always fallen, which is this a way that the DSG is funding a social care budget? That's the question that we've asked in the past, but because we've never had any information, we've never really known whether we are funding a social care budget or not.
So sorry to press the issue, but you know, I'm still, and it might be just me being thick because I don't, but if it's central government or local government, if there's a 20% funding cut for vulnerable children, it seems to me that is morally wrong and should be challenged at this scrutiny committee. If it's not, that's fine, but that's what I'm struggling to understand.
I think we need to bring the data. I think we need to have a discussion. I think that's what we need to do next.
And I think because it's the whole pot that is being cut, not just this aspect of it. So it could be that our decision in the future is that this part of the budget is not cut at all, but other areas of the central services budget are cut, so that we can carry on funding this part of the pot at the same rate. And I think your point is, Peter, is that should we be saying to central government that this is having an impact upon vulnerable children? I think without knowing whether that's just us in this local authority that does it this way, in which they may say, well, you need to organise yourselves in a different way so that this doesn't have that impact. If there are lots of local authorities that are funding this aspect of their work in this way, then we could see that as something that we could take back to them and write to them and say, do you realise that this is the impact that your reductions are having? Yeah. I think, as Sharon said, that's quite a bit of extra, not extra work, that's quite a bit of work to really unpick. As I say, this is the most we've ever had about this area of the budget. So at least it is a step forward to knowing what it actually goes towards.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Thank you, Peter. Have I got another comment? Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Carrie.
Good afternoon, everyone. So this first slide is really just setting the scene for new members around school effectiveness. So the support from the DSG is to the tune of £838,000 going to support staff costs and when we run head teacher events and training. You can see there the split for Northamptonshire County Council in terms of academy and local authority maintained school, then moving forward what that picture will look like for the north and for the west. Thank you, Beth. In terms of school effectiveness, the role of the local authority, as we all know, has completely changed, and we now really focus on systems leadership. So how the local authority can work with all stakeholders and be an integral part of the system, but not the system itself. So we look to how we can deliver head teacher induction, we still deliver NQT induction, we'll look to support governor services and offer high quality support for governors. So all the way through to statutory duties around moderation and monitoring of statutory assessments and ensuring our commission is up to date. So the list is extensive around our system leadership support that we still offer. Thank you, Beth. In terms of breaking down the DSG then, so we fund the strategic manager's role. We have 2 team leaders for school effectiveness, one in the north and one in the west, as it is a disaggregated service. We have got a 0.8, so a part-time senior school improvement partner, and then we have 6.6 school improvement partners. So ultimately what we have done predominantly this year is, when we've lost more expensive members of senior staff, we have recruited to vacancies at a lower level in order to save costs. Thank you very much, Beth. So in terms of COVID and school effectiveness, COVID has really shaped and impacted upon the work of school effectiveness this academic year, well, last academic year rather, and they were really at the forefront of the local authorities' response, ensuring that all of the teams across the council, from health and safety, HR, school transport, we all work together in order to have that wraparound support of schools to ensure that when information was needed, it was coming through school effectiveness. They were that one port of call, and they could liaise with all services internally, so the heads were getting that rapid support that they required. And that way of working has really been praised by the schools, and it's something that as a local authority we're really looking at and thinking, how can we not work in silos and really work together to give that high quality support to our schools. So building on from not only internal working, school effectiveness delivered virtual question and answer sessions, the created risk assessments and recovery planning tools for schools. You're still getting the letters which summarise of the key government legislation. We have done, we've looked at how we work, and we do virtual and physical meetings. We're at the end of the phone, at the end of the email when there's concerns. But for us, most importantly, we are running coffee and cake sessions, we're calling them. The last one was Friday just past. And it's a chance to give all of the head teachers an opportunity to meet together, share any kind of emotional concerns that they may have, offload in a safe environment, because we are concerned with the toll that COVID has taken on head teachers' mental health and well-being. So it's a more of an informal sharing session, and I think that's really important. Thank you, Beth. And so, but business as usual still continues. And as I've said, we're doing physical meetings and we're doing virtual meetings depending on the needs of that school. We're making it very bespoke at the moment. Our challenge is still there with regards to underperforming schools and where we've got a statutory role. So we have continued with school causing concern meetings. Currently they are virtual due to the number of people that need to be present, but they are ongoing. And in order to, again, further reduce costs, the new team leaders for school effectiveness have developed an intervention approach. We're calling it the Targeted Improvement Group. So it is to catch schools who are a declining good and earlier stage, so therefore they can have a more intensive level of support prior to the schools causing concern stage. So that should reduce intervention costs if we catch it before the rot sets in and they become more difficult to move, especially if we move into government and Ofsted criteria. Thank you, Beth. In terms of the impact, unfortunately, it's really hard to measure the impact of the work of school effectiveness at the moment, apart from anecdotal feedback from head teachers. Obviously, we have got a raft of data from external exams. However, for the 2019 to 2020 exam series, obviously, we had a cancellation of phonics, Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2. And although Key Stage 4 exams did take place, although we did have Key Stage 4 exams in principle, the government is not releasing that data to local authorities, so we are not able to really look and interrogate the data as we have done previously. Obviously, we have previous years and we're hoping to see something in the year ahead. Thank you, Beth. With regards to leadership and governance, focusing on school governance, we're very proud of this £60,000 we get from the DSG. We are really building and focusing on this new area. Well, not new area, but with new colleagues, and we're really focusing on building this up. So we've got a lot of new things, new offers, new products for 2020-21, including chair governor seminars, forums. We're working to develop our accredited schemes with the NGA. We do more policy development than we've ever done before, creating model policies, and we are supporting again more than ever around the recruitment of local authority governors, and we're doing a series of checks prior to names being passed over to schools. So in terms of the work that leadership and governance are doing, there's been a serious and significant increase in 2020-21. However, that is really building on from the work from the previous year, thank you Beth, where you can see that in the previous year, the work was more around support for schools causing concern, basic workshops to keep them updated to government headlines, running training around head teacher performance management, and support for schools for recruitment, whereas we're now leading on that for LA governors. So in terms of the school governance, we're really pleased with the direction of travel that's going, and again, looking to the horizon, we're seeing what more value we can offer to schools in that arena. Thank you. So it's back to Sharon.
Are you happy for me to carry on, Jo, or do you want to pause?
No, can I just ask a couple of questions? Sorry, because there's a question from Vanessa, which is about the support for governors. That's governors' services as was.
So in terms of so the support for governor services. So that's our work with LGSS. So we work with them to ensure that they're our training arm. So they offer more governor training sessions via Teaching School Alliances. So that's part of us offered through another service.
Okay, and just for me, it's the division between the DSG and the SIG. So when I looked at that previous slide, as an academy, I tend to feel that as academies we see very little of the DSG spend, and I might be talking completely out of turn here for other academies in here, but I tend to feel we see very, very little of what is a DSG spend, therefore comes from all of us.
So in terms, this is something that's been, I understand it's been put before, so therefore we're really
probably by me.
So we're really focusing on what it is that we offer academies, because you're 100% right, you are to be included. And from a local authority point of view, the children in your school are still Northamptonshire County Council's children. And when we split north and west, there'll be children to those local authorities as well. So we are developing a range and looking to how we can include academies in our offer. So when we look at things like partnership head teachers and associate head teachers, where an academy trust requires that type of support, we're looking at how we can offer that support to you so that you're able to access that as an academy without additional charges. When we run head teacher events, again, we're looking to offer them to all schools, to all heads, to make sure academies can attend. We're not there yet. It's not like the finished article, but from this point on, we are looking at everything we do. Can we make sure academies can access that? Because again, there's not much point of us cutting you out of the picture, because it's fruitless, because there are children at the end of the day, and local authorities are still held accountable for the standards of all children, and that includes the ones in academies. So it's about how we can work together, and if we don't get it right, I always value academies coming back to me and saying, oh well, we should be included in this, and it's that open dialogue going forward.
Thank you, Carrie, that's very encouraging. Thank you. Any other comments, colleagues? It might be just me banging my drum as usual, but well, if you've got a drum, you might as well bang it. Sharon, back to you.
Thanks, Jo. I think the point you made, I think actually this time last year, I think hopefully you can see that I did listen, and Carrie and the team are looking at that. I do think COVID has obviously delayed some of that, but nonetheless, actually, those officers have absolutely been supporting all, as yourself and James will testify anyway. But I think just to reassert what Carrie said, absolutely have heard that, and we will look to continue and not be as centric on our maintained schools as perhaps we have been in the past.
Thank you.
Point. Okay, so I'll just give you a few slides now on our education, inclusion and partnership team. And this links back to, again, to our colleagues that are new to our alternative provision. So this team exists to support our vulnerable learners in education, and where at all possible, keep our children in maintained schools, look to drive down the use of exclusions, fixed term exclusions, identify patterns that might be happening in a particular community or in school settings, and also support where we need the placement of our children and young people into alternative provision. So again, I won't read point by point, but that gives you an overview of that team of people in place. This service has had a review this year and is undergoing changes. I want to, back to our previous conversations earlier on, we need to look at how we can help with that early help and prevention agenda, where we spot either changes in exclusion patterns through change of school leadership, for example, or through a particular issue in a school community. For example, county lines might drive some activity in a particular setting. So we've done a deep dive of this service. I'm pleased to say they're a really committed bunch, but I think also there are some opportunities for us, particularly as we move to the north and the west, to really put some locality structures and targeted working. So this is what they currently do. What I'd like us to be doing in the future and what we're looking towards is how can we get further downstream around the early help and prevention. So we've started dialogue conversations with colleagues in the Children's Trust about working with the early help offer within the Trust. So I suppose that's a way of saying this is what we currently do. What we will be communicating to you all probably April onwards, some changes around the landscape of provision and support, but a very important team to work with our most vulnerable children. Primary focus is going to be keeping in mainstream where we can and reducing that escalation to exclusion and into alternative provision. So this is that team. Next slide, please. We did some work around, so COVID has changed the profile of this team for a period of time. I think we've talked before at school forums about electively home educated children. So we did see a significant increase in electively home education requests from parents in September and October. It has tailed off now, but nonetheless, this team will work with schools and families and parents and children where necessary to support electively home educated children. We are also, through our COVID, well, you can't really see that chart very clearly, but we set some measures looking at would exclusions change because of COVID, the return to school from the long break over the summer. So again, we changed some of our policies and procedures and introduced some new measures just to make sure that we could keep a very close eye in relation to how COVID might have changed different outcomes for children. And we've fed that information to the DFE on various calls.
Thank you. Peter, do you have a question about this slide?
It was about the previous slide, actually. I didn't get my hand up quickly enough. Yeah, one of my little bugbears is, and it may not be related to this slide, but just if you're looking at this again in the future or looking at the service, I fully support trying to stop as many exclusions as possible, but very sadly I've had to chair one or two permanent exclusions. When I used to do this in Birmingham local authority, there was always a representative from the local authority at those hearings, so that because if they were permanently excluded, then the local authority was kind of looking after them at that point, and so the panel could get a real feel for that child and what provision will be for that child. And that's not been the case in Northamptonshire. And I just would like to recommend that if you're looking at the provision again, that might be the case, because I think it would help with children at risk of being permanently excluded.
Yeah, absolutely aware of that, and that's one of the things we're looking at.
Thank you.
Next slide, Beth, please. So just general update. Currently, the service manager for this service is vacant. I'm holding it vacant because I just want to complete the review, so I'm really clear about what we need and want going forward, and in the landscape of the two new unitaries as well. As I've mentioned, there is an improvement plan. So that's both doing the things we can immediately do because they're the right things we need to do, but also looking to future changes in the service. As again mentioned earlier, looking to really work with our alternative providers. So sometimes there can be a delay in accessing the alternative provision around referrals, etc. So again, back through previous conversations, through our memorandum of understanding, we'll be establishing key performance indicators to make sure that's tighter, so children aren't without education for any longer than they need to be. We also have a cohort of children who are on private tuition, and we want to focus on those to get them back into a school setting with their peers and enable their learning. So it's really just to say there's much more for us to do. I think we understand the service more than we have done historically, and I'm hoping that we will, with Kathy's leadership, also be transforming this service. And again, it's something we will be talking to schools about, a new offer, including that locality working issue, which is what really Peter refers to, about that early engagement, understanding patterns and establishing the best pathway for our most vulnerable children. Not least, if they stay in maintained, then we have money elsewhere in the system that we can support other activities. Okay, moving on. Okay, and then I'll try and do this one justice, but it's not really mine. So this is a smaller pot of money, which I think is sitting in the Children's Trust. Kathy, correct me if I'm wrong. And I believe that these are obviously officers that work around that targeted support, and I think it's part of the early help offer. So again, it's a dedicated piece of money through this budget, which is designed to do that initial support using a number of accredited parenting programmes. But I probably can't do any more justice than that, but it is there for your information, Jo, as you've asked before.
This one, I know what they do.
Excellent. Okay, and I think, is that the end of, oh yeah, and then that's the diagram from the team in the trust, just to explain the work that they've been doing. Okay, I think that's it.
Yeah, that slide. Okay, any other comments, colleagues, on Sharon's presentation? No, thank you very much, Sharon. But, you know, as I said before, great improvement on previous years. So thank you very much for that, and we will look forward to the next steps in that journey, and then in terms of looking at the budget long term. Okay, Beth, we're on to Central School Services block 21-22.
Yeah, right. So there are two main parts to this block of DSG funding. We have the ongoing responsibilities and the historic commitments. The ongoing responsibilities funding is formula driven. 90% of it is determined by a per pupil rate, and 10% is based on deprivation characteristics of Northamptonshire. The historic commitments are funding allocations, as its name suggests, carried forward from previous years, and that's the part of the Central Schools Services block that's reducing by 20% each year. The indicative allocation for 21-22 is 8.48 million compared to 9.63 million in 2021, so a reduction of 1.15 million. The final settlement, as I've said, we're expecting this week. The provisional allocation we've been provided with didn't give that split by North and West. The work that we've been doing with the ESFA has provided provisional figures. The ongoing commitment funding is based on pupil numbers, so we can estimate the disaggregation for that part of the funding. The ESFA have said that they'll take our lead ultimately on how to split that historical funding. And I've provided a version of these slides and the appendix to this report to them. The ongoing responsibilities covers the admissions service, the schools forum, our copyright licenses, which allows schools to photocopy educational material, and activities funded from the previous Education Services grant. The areas funded from this budget were reduced by 100,000 in 2021, reflecting commitment to forum. reduce the funding of the combined services for children's family support. The indicative funding for ongoing responsibilities has increased by 95,000 across the whole of Northamptonshire, 21-22. We don't yet know how much the copyright charge will increase by or how that will be split. We await the final settlement to find out that figure. It is possible to move Central School Services block funding to other blocks. Built-in Schools Forum costs, which are currently 11.2 thousand, not pounds, sorry. Which includes committee services and membership to the F40 funding group. We propose to match that in both LAs, so I've doubled that to 22.4 thousand. The historic commitments part of this funding block covers the combined budgets as per agenda item 8, the ongoing teachers' pension costs and school effectiveness. As the DfE have previously notified, this element of funding is reducing by 20% each year, which means a reduction of 1.15 million in 21-22 in the draft figures. So the top level view looks like this. We have the indicative announcement split there between ongoing responsibilities 3.5 million and historic commitments 4. And we have our expected commitments shown below. And overall, we have a predicted underspend of 440,000, significantly less headroom than we had last year of 1.62 million. But this is the indicative CSSB disaggregation. We're awaiting the final figures, but based on expenditure and previous historical commitments and ongoing commitment budgets, the splits are shown here by the contribution to combined services, the report for which you've just seen, that's the 2.31 million, split there between West and North. The PFI contribution, all of the schools PFIs, mainstream schools PFI, moved 2 years ago into the schools block, and they're built into the budgets, the individual schools budgets within the schools block. But the special school PFI has to still sit within the central schools block, and that's within the West. Then we have the centrally funded schools termination employment costs. And they're teachers that have retired. I was just trying to look it up on my phone. It's either before 2003 or 2013. I can't remember the year. I think it's those that have retired before the funding changes to the formula and the national funding formulas that have been put in place. So I think it's 2003 that they retired previous to. So that's the subtotal of historic commitments there. Then we have the breakdown by West and North for the ongoing services, the admissions, the schools forum, national copyright licenses estimate, and the ex-education services grant. Then I've just put a split there for the expected, the sort of predicted headroom that we've earmarked for DSG overspend on the high needs block, but obviously it's a very tiny contribution to that this year in comparison to the size of the overspend. So overall, based on the indicative allocation, no reductions to any central school services block budgets are required, and there is a small headroom in the CSSB of 221,500 for West Northamptonshire Unitary and 221,500 for North. We propose to use the headroom to part fund the high needs deficit expected to be carried forward. The schools funding operational guide identifies the schools forum responsibilities for central spend where expenditure is already committed, which can only be up to the value committed in prior years. Central spend, where no limit exists, part of the CSSB ongoing responsibilities. And central spend, where no formal vote is required, but we need to consult with Forum as part of the ongoing responsibilities. That's the copyright licenses. We do have an ability to move funding between blocks. The operational guidance states that there's not subject to any limit, but must be made within consultation with the Schools Forum. We're not currently suggesting a transfer between blocks, but we are proposing to cover any brought forward overspend from 2021 with any headroom that might exist within the Central School Services block. So in summary, indicative NFF primary and secondary schools, individual schools block, sorry, it's national funding formula, primary and secondary schools, individual schools budgets formula, including pupil growth budget in 21-22 is 541 million. Central expenditure of 4.98 million on the historical block equates to 9% of that budget. For noting, as in previous years, the copyright budget will be increased in line with DfE confirmation. The central school budgets have to be voted on a line-by-line basis. If there's any major change, if there's a significant change when we receive the final settlement, we'll bring this back to you in the January forum to vote on again. But that's very unusual and it hasn't happened in previous years. So I'll stop there for any questions before we move on to the vote.
Any questions from anybody? Okay, so if we can just now look at, we have to vote on this line by line. Again, I will do, I'm just thinking I need to bring this up on my other screen so I can look at it while you close your screen. Hang on, what number are we? We are item 9. Okay, just so I've got the word in for each of the votes. So if you could close that down, Beth. And then I can read it out. Okay, so what we have is a line-by-line vote. We will do it as we did earlier, which is by exception, as in if you disagree, please let us know rather than if you agree. So forum vote on the 2.3 million contribution to combined budgets. All those against?
Can't see any against, Chair.
No, I can't see any against. And all those abstaining?
Rob Hardcastle.
Abstain. Okay, thank you. Okay. And using the hand button is really useful because it puts you at the top of the thing. Peter, do you need your hand still to be up?
No, sorry, my mistake.
That's okay, I just want to check. I didn't think it was, but okay. So that is agreed. Thank you, colleagues. 2.3 million contribution to combined budgets remains. 2.14 million schools budget centrally funded termination of employment costs. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that is agreed. Then we have 0.96 million to admissions. All those against? And anyone abstaining? Thank you, that's agreed. 0.96 million to admissions. 0.02 million to schools fora at £11,300 each. All those against? And anyone abstaining? Thank you very much. Schools Forum will continue with no biscuits though when we're by Zoom. Goodness me, those small dry biscuits that we always complained about now seem a luxury in life. Okay, and then the 1.72 million, which is the previous ESG grant, well, the G is granted, previous ESG, all those against? And anybody abstaining? Okay, and I think that we are also therefore voting on the final point. Is that correct, Beth? We just need to agree that as a forum about the money going to the high needs overspend. We need to agree that. Okay, so that we agree that any headroom that there is in the CSSB, which is currently estimated to be 0.44 million, be used to offset the 2020-21 DSG high needs overspend. Anybody who is wishes to vote against that, please indicate now. And anybody who wishes to abstain from that, please indicate now. Thank you, colleagues. So we have agreed with each of those. Forum has voted to agree with each of those statements on the slide. Thank you very much, everybody. Okay, thank you, Beth. Okay, so we are moving to, oh, Beth, it's you again. So just SB1 form and school balances.
Yeah, this is kind of a housekeeping exercise in the regulations. When we try and change this form, when we need to change this form, we have to bring it to Schools Forum for consultation and agreement. It's the form that maintains schools report their year-end balances on. It's broken down by category. We've got some additional grants shown on there this year, and going into 21-22. We need to capture those. There's also a small amendment to capturing the capital grant because there's a greater audit scrutiny on that this year, and we want to try and capture that more clearly. So if we could just have a vote on that, please. Sorry,
I'm muted.
Vote, is it?
This is a vote for everybody. Yes, whether we fill the SB1 out or not. Just for maintained. I'm just thinking maintained schools only. Okay, so maintained school members, of which secretary we have?
We've got Siobhan Hearn, Pat Kelly and Vanessa Bradley on the call. I was expecting John Lake, but I don't think he's managed to join. So we've got three.
I will go to a positive vote on this one. If those three members, which is Pat, Vanessa and Siobhan, could indicate by their hand that they agree with the variations to the SB1 form to find the to look at the school balances for maintained schools. So if you could tell us if you agree with that. Thank you very much, Pat and Vanessa.
I can't see Siobhan. I think she may have.
Siobhan may have left.
Siobhan had to leave, yeah.
Siobhan had to leave, so it's just Pat and Vanessa. Thank you very much, Pat and Vanessa. Both members are in favour. Thank you. Anything else on that, Beth?
No.
Thank you very much. Thank you there. And Beth, you're going to talk to us about the risk register as well?
Yeah, it's just briefly to say that we're going to split that into 2 risk registers and bring it back to you in more detail in March. It's good practice and it's in the guidance that we need to bring that to you. And we had been previously doing that every other meeting, but with the disaggregation work and budget work and COVID, we haven't had time to refresh that for this meeting. So we'll do a bigger piece of work on that, make it more robust and bring it as North and West in March.
And clearly one of the risks on there is disaggregation.
Yeah.
And so it's about thinking about the how we mitigate that that risk within the register. Okay. Thank you very much for that. So, sorry.
Sorry, apologies, Chair. No, it was me, but I'll bring it up under the next section of the meeting for the Shadow Authority.
Okay, so just looking there, Paul, at Schools Forum Plan 2020 and 21.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I won't spend long on this. As usual, by the time we get to the Schools Forum Plan, it's heavily out of date. So we've got a number of items such as PFI and the final schools budget that will be coming back in January. The meeting's on the 19th, so not that long away at all, only 4 weeks. I'll confer with colleagues on the exact format for the meeting, as I expect the shadow forums to continue taking a greater role on that. But unless colleagues have got any comments, I won't say any more.
Okay, it doesn't look like we've got much to do in March, though.
That's the plan. We'll see how that turns out.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. There any comments on the Schools Forum Plan? No, looks like it's going to quite a heavy meeting in January, though. So, okay. Any urgent business? We haven't been notified of any. So, have anyone got anything that they wish to raise? So, as Paul just said, then our next meeting is Tuesday, the 19th of January, 2021. We'll all have got used to writing it by then. So I should be grateful to write 2021 instead of 2020, that's for sure. So thank you very much, colleagues, for your attendance this afternoon, and I'm sure we will all reconvene in a very short while in another meeting, in another gathering.
Chair, I'll keep this Zoom call open.
Okay.
So do members want to take a short break and then reconvene at say 15:40? That'd be okay with everyone?
Yeah, are we reconvening us both together, or is this?
Well, I'd anticipate both meetings will be fairly short. You may have noticed that during this meeting, I've been busily renaming. Unless you've dropped out and rejoined, I've renamed everyone to indicate whether you're West and North. So some members are North only, some are West only, and some are both. So I'd suggest we have the North one with everyone present, and then any North only members can leave, and then we'll have the West one.
Thank you. Okay. So how long should we take for a break? 5 minutes? Do we need any longer than 5 minutes, anybody?
Joe, sorry, I'm a bit befuddled. Do you need us, Paul, as well, or are we able to go?
I don't think so. I was planning to just run through the votes that we've already taken, so I'm not anticipating there'll be a great deal of questions.
That was a big smile then, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sharon. Thank you very much to all our local authority members. Thank you. So we'll just do 5 minutes and then we will reconvene at 15:35. Is that okay? Thank you. See you in a minute.